Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now let me say, today is the 5th of December, 2016. I'm aware that some big fights took place over the weekend involving some big upsets. What I want people to do who haven't seen some of those fights, the Denis Lebedev fight, for example, right, is I want you to just look in my favorites folder here on YouTube, right? You'll actually find some of the fights that took place this weekend. I'll try to get to those fights. Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm long-winded as it is. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about two fights. Right, give you a post-fight video on Julius Indongo, who now is the IBF lightweight champion, right, and the IBO lightweight champion. His victory over Edward Troyanovsky, right. Then I want to talk about Joe Smith Jr. against Bernard Hopkins. Now let me say this, right, I'm just a YouTuber here like everyone else. Right? I'm not a boxing manager. I don't have a manager's license. I don't have a promoter's license. But in the entire sport of boxing, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more mysterious, more intriguing fighter than the unbeaten Julius Indongo, right? Who just on foreign soil picked up two of the light welterweight titles, right? Super lightweight, light welterweight, 140, Terence Crawford's division. Now, if I were a manager, if I were a promoter, I would really have to think hard about trying to get the rights to this guy's next fight. Understand, most of these contracts, believe it or not, allow for assignability. Why? Because fighters are getting a lot of bad advice, right? And fighters are willing to sign almost any piece of paper for an opportunity. This guy's intriguing. He's 5'10 and a half. Yet he's fighting at 140. To put that in perspective, Terence Crawford, who's not small for a 140-pounder, is only 5'8". More importantly, this guy's fight style is unique in boxing today because he's one of the rare fighters who knows how to use length. He's a tall guy. He doesn't give it away. He's not bending over. He's not bending forward. You have to come find him. There's length between you and him. Understand, the champ going into this fight, Troyanovsky, is actually a master boxer. He's highly skilled. He's a very good fighter. He came into this fight unbeaten. What I want you to do is you look at the tape, and yes, it's in my favorites folder. As you look at a tape of the fight, you're going to notice that Troyanovsky doesn't get close to Indongo. Doesn't get close to him, right? He's trying to figure out the angles. Indongo keeps moving backwards subtly, right? Indongo has a jab. It's not a great jab, folks. It's not. I have a second Indongo fight in my favorites folder here. You can judge for yourself, right? Indongo's jab, in fact, looks a little bit lazy. In other words, it looks like he can be countered over it. Now, looking at the films I've come across, right? Well, the two films I've come across, right? Both of them in my favorites folder. I cannot tell if this guy is just an innocent who is doing things that leaves himself open to be countered, or whether this guy's actually a chess player who's trying to give you the impression that he's open to get countered as he's lazy bringing the jab back, so that you focus on your offense and he's able to get off the kind of left hand, he's a southpaw, that he gets off here in this fight that ends the fight. What you'll notice is in both of the videos I have in my favorites folder, this guy closes the show early with the same left hand. And it's a left hand that's not straight. There's a little bit of a curve on it. It's kind of like a Golovkin left hand, right? Where Troyanovsky actually has a hand up. He actually puts a hand here. But because the punch from distance, this is not mid-range, this is long range. Because the left hand comes from distance and because it has a curve on it, right? Indongo hits him right on the chin. Game, set, match, title. Now, here again, you wonder what's going on. Is this guy an innocent? Or is he a chess player? According to reports, the contract that he signed for the title fight didn't have a rematch clause. Folks, he's a free agent with 2 of the belts at 140 pounds. So let me say this, understand, whether he can fight or not, and it does look, right, half his fights roughly have ended by stoppage. It does look like he knows how to hide the angles early, right? It does look like he's hard to find in the ring. Right? The visual is devastating because he's tall and lanky. It looks too like he's a bit charismatic. Right? I get the feeling that let's say he fights a Terence Crawford. Let's say Crawford gets inside and let's say this guy doesn't have anything inside, which could be a distinct possibility. Right? It's still going to be a devastating visual that you're going to remember because it's going to take a while to get inside on this guy because of this guy's power, because of this guy's athleticism, right? The guy's not a potted plant, right? And then it's going to look like a smaller fighter chopping down a bigger tree. Let me say this too. Let's say he can't fight. Unbeaten fighters with the number of fights this guy has are going to look good on the boxing poster for the fight, right? Because if the guy loses his next fight, he's 20-something and 1. If he loses the fight after that, he's 20-something and 2, right? There's a lot of room there for him to lose matches. But let's talk about a different scenario. Isn't 140 the division of Mikey Garcia? How do we know that this guy, who's a southpaw, who's hard to read, in other words, he's too far from you for you to fully figure out the angles, right? He looks open for things, then you realize he's 33 years old. Is he a ringer? Right? There is a possibility. The guy already has titles at 140, folks. He's unbeaten. There is a possibility that this guy might actually be world class and might be able to beat some of the other guys. So, to the big time promoters in the sport, to the big time managers, if you're looking for an opportunity, if you're looking for a fighter who, quite frankly, has some things you can't teach, right? The guy is tall, 5'10 and a half. The guy makes 140, right? The guy knows how to stay outside early. The guy knows how to deal with the press. Let me say this. you'll be hard-pressed to find a crowd more stunned than this crowd. When their guy, an unbeaten champion, gets KO'd in the first round, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone is dazed and confused. They don't know what happened, even though it's clear after he lands the punch that the fight is over. Right? So if you're a promoter, if you're a manager, this guy right now is one of the most desirable opportunities in the entire sport of boxing. Right? Unbeaten champion, charismatic, at 140, interesting weight class. Understand, Manny Pacquiao is talking about dropping down. There was talk about a Lomachenko-Pacquiao fight. Right? What might be desirable is for a promoter to try to give Lomachenko an opportunity to get a title at 140 pounds. Right? Julius Indongo has 2 of them. Right? Loma, who doesn't have a big punch, would have to get inside on this guy. And I'm telling you, this guy, even though his KO ratio is about 50%, has a huge left hand. Right? Huge left hand. Let me say this too. It's interesting. As I look at the film, again, I don't know if the guy is, an innocent or a chess player. But there are times in the other film that I have in my favorites folder for this guy, not the championship fight, but the other fight. There are times when the guy looks like he's trying to set something up off the jab. What's interesting with that film, and this fight is from Namibia, is when you look at the crowd, it looks like they're fighting in a high school gym. Right? So it's a little amazing that this guy then graduates to a title fight and is as cool, calm, collected, and ready as he is at the beginning of this title fight on the champion's home soil. So remember the name, Julius Indongo. Right? Let's just say, for me, the jury's still out. Right? He's clearly the champion. If he's a chess player, then this brother's much more dangerous than I'm letting on in this video. If he came out and thought, you know what, I'm going to look like I'm lazy pulling this jab back. I'm going to get this champion to think that I'm vulnerable on this side. Then as he's focused on this side, I'm going to come with my left hand, my money punch, and I'm going to curve it around his defense. If he's that guy, the rules at 140 have just been changed radically. Right? If he's an innocent and he looks good in one-round fights, right, where he finishes the guy in a round, right, you'll figure out that he's an innocent when he fights a world-class fighter who actually jumps on him. Right? Understand, height is a good thing only some of the time. Right? If a shorter guy can get underneath you and start ripping up your rib cage and start throwing uppercuts on you, right? Isn't that Joe Frazier's career? Isn't that Mike Tyson's career? Isn't that Rocky Marciano's career? Isn't that Jack Dempsey's career? Right? At least against Jess Willard. My point to you is, if a guy gets inside, we just don't know what's going to happen. Let's shift to Joe Smith Jr. versus Bernard Hopkins. Now, it's almost the same thing, isn't it, here? A little bit different, but Joe Smith KOs Andres Fonfara in the first round. In a round in which, by the way, Fonfara lands a few shots. Right? Joe Smith is having problems, folks. That's what I call a shootout in the first round. Then Andres gets a little bit full of himself, right? Drops his left a bit. Joe Smith throws a short, and that's important here, short right hand. And Andres Fonfara is not the same, right? He hits the canvas. This is boxing. When he gets up, he has a lot of testosterone going, right? The fight was in Andres Fonfara's backyard. Fonfara tries to look tough, but you knew he wasn't, right? He actually runs over and falls into the ropes. Now, at that moment, what I want people looking at that film to do is to look at Joe Smith. You can tell a guy who's a puncher by how they react when they knock the other guy down. If you don't have a punch and you knock the other guy down, you're like dying to get back on him because you understand this opportunity is going to be fleeting. Right? You understand that this is a lucky moment for you. You need to take advantage of it. Well, let me say, we're all trying to be psychologists here, right? We're all trying to get some mental understanding of the sport. When Andres Fonfara gets off the canvas and then staggers into the ropes, Joe Smith just smiles. Right? He just smiles in the corner. He raises his hands, right? To me, that's a sign that this guy is accustomed to being a slugger. This guy has a big punch, and for him, the only question is whether he lands it, right? There's no rush on him, right? Fonfara goes down and Joe Smith smiles as if to say, yeah, I got him. Right? There's no, oh my God, I knocked him down. No. Joe Smith, big underdog, knocks the guy down. Guy gets off the canvas. Joe Smith is not even disappointed. Right? He just smiles. He's just, yeah, I got him now. Yeah. We can now fight my kind of fight. So then Joe goes over there and you'll notice, again, this is the slugger's mentality. He's patiently just ready to throw the punch he wants to throw. Huge punching power. Huge. Now here's why I'm taking Bernard Hopkins in the fight. I understand many people saw Hopkins get beat up, and he was beaten up badly, by Sergei Kovalev, right? Beat up by Kovalev. Couldn't handle Kovalev's volume. Was very low volume in the fight, right? Very low volume in the fight. But what I want people to realize is, one, Kovalev has a great jab. I believe that's the punch that throws Hopkins off. The other thing people need to realize is how incestuous boxing is. Right? The guy training Hopkins for this Joe Smith fight is Kovalev's trainer, John David Jackson, who, back in the day, Hopkins not only fought, but Hopkins was actually John David Jackson's chief sparring partner for a period of time. What I want people to realize too with Hopkins is, I know Bernard lately has had his back up against the ropes in fights, trying to lure young lions in and then trying to counter them on the way in. But there's a different Hopkins out there, isn't there? What I want people to do is to go back and look at one of Hopkins' best fights, when he jumps 2 weight classes to fight for the light heavyweight title the first time against Antonio Tarver. Now, why did Hopkins do it? Because Hopkins is a student of boxing, and he's aware of the fact that Ray Robinson was a dominant middleweight, just like Bernard was, And before he retired, Ray Robinson decided he was going to jump 2 weight classes and fight for the light heavyweight title. So Hopkins promised his mother that this would be his last fight. Right? Right. Good luck holding fighters to that promise. Well, Hopkins then is fighting Antonio Tarver, who of course was doing the losing weight thing, right? Because he of course had just filmed a Rocky movie where he was Mason the Line Dixon, right? So he's losing weight to get back to his boxing weight. So Hopkins knew he'd be sluggish in the ring. So understand, in that fight, Hopkins doesn't have his back up against the ropes. Hopkins is actually moving around the ring. Right? He's circling Antonio Tarver. This is a part of Hopkins we haven't seen in a while. Right? He's circling Antonio Tarver. You know, at times he's leading. He's using a jab. In my opinion, he has the capability to fight that fight. And if he does, I think he beats Joe Smith. Right? Joe Smith, huge puncher, front foot heavy. Likes to come forward. Here's the catch with Joe Smith Jr. You know how boxers, Vitaly Klitschko, right? Floyd Mayweather, Ali, Ray Leonard. You know how defensively blessed boxers will literally trust their reflexes. Right? And as you throw on them, the guy will move his head. Right? In other words, you have to catch up with the guy. The guy doesn't have to have a hand up to dodge your punch. Right? It actually allows the fighter to fight a lot quicker. So if you're fighting Vitaly Klitschko and you throw on him and Klitschko moves back and the punch ends here, he can then come back with a 1-2, right? You're extended. You've missed. You're open. You're vulnerable. Now, the thing with Joe Smith is he doesn't do that. He's hardwired. Look at his fights. I believe I have a video of Joe Smith against a guy who's 3-3 at the time of their bout. The guy goes to 6-round distance. It was a fight from 2013. The guy goes to 6-round distance with Joe Smith. And what you'll notice in that fight is, as the guy throws on Joe Smith is defending himself using his construct. In other words, he's not moving around the ring. His defense isn't to make you miss before you throw the punch. In other words, be in a position where you can't throw the right hand you want to throw. Right? Those are the masters. Understand, when you're looking at a blessed defensive fighter, the guy often is doing things that just prevent you from doing what you do best. Right? That's not Joe Smith. Right? Joe Smith is not relying on spacing for defense. He's not relying on moving his head for defense, right? He's not a guy who rolls with punches. So you throw it and he's rolling and your punch hits a shoulder and then he's countering you. That's not Joe Smith. Rather, Joe Smith is a guy who has to have his hands up to block shots. So you'll notice in Joe Smith's fights, he's leaning forward, right? His head's never back. He's not the guy with his head back who's, trying to dodge you. No, his head's forward. He has his hands up. This is his construct. You throw a lot of punches at Joe Smith, and you can dampen his volume. He's so busy. He's so busy blocking shots with his hands, right, that he can't get punches off. I believe Bernard Hopkins can fight this fight on his back foot what Hopkins, who is defensively blessed. Let's remember, as bad as he looks against Kovalev, he goes the distance with Kovalev. Right? As slow as he was versus Joe Calzaghe. He goes the distance with Joe Calzaghe. Right? Look at the Calzaghe fights, the Calzaghe-Manfredo fight, where an opponent was overwhelmed by Calzaghe's hand speed and gets stopped early. Even though Bernard Hopkins is not blessed with hand speed. Right? Bernard Hopkins goes the distance with Calzaghe. I'm not even talking about younger Bernard, who goes the distance with prime Roy Jones. I'm talking about Bernard's relatively recent fights. I know the Calzaghe fights a few years ago, but understand, Bernard doesn't fight that often. Right? The Kovalev fight, I believe, is Bernard's last fight. He goes the distance with Kovalev. Kovalev, like Joe Smith, huge puncher. Kovalev's two-handed. Joe Smith does have a jab. But it's not it's not Sergei Kovalev's jab. So I'm expecting Bernard to keep Joe Smith, and I know it's counterintuitive here, but I'm expecting him to keep Joe Smith at a distance. Why? Because Joe Smith's best game is when he gets up on you, when he's able to put his head right here, when he's able to shorten his punches. He's devastating inside. So the way to fight a fighter like this is to keep him outside. Use a jab. Use the ring. Move around the ring. Throw volume on the guy. Not so much to hurt him, but to force a guy who isn't there dodging shots with his body to use his hands to block the shots, because if he's using his hands to block shots, he can't use them to hit you. Right? Joe Smith's last two fights went a grand total, I'm talking about adding the two fights together, went a grand total of 3 rounds. 3 rounds. Now, Joe Smith has a devastating right hand from up close. I think the jury's still out on whether that punch is devastating from long range. If Bernard is simply long range, fighting the fight that he fought against Tarver. And let's remember, Tarver's the man who knocked out Roy Jones. Right? Tarver has a big punch. Bernard was able to stop Tarver, not by KO, but beat Tarver, by staying outside using movement, dampening Tarver's volume, not giving Tarver the opportunity to catch him up against the ropes like Roy Jones did. So I'm expecting a different Bernard Hopkins than the one who fought Kovalev. Understand, Kovalev came in on Hopkins and threw a lot of volume. When Hopkins had his hands up, Kovalev hit his hands. Now Hopkins is using Kovalev's trainer. I believe Hopkins is hoping to fight like Kovalev in this fight. Only where Kovalev was trying to knock you out, I believe Hopkins just wants to come in, increase his volume, move away from Joe Smith, knowing that Joe Smith might not have what I call ring coverage. Right? That David Haye, Deontay Wilder, James DeGale ability to hit you from the next area code. Right? If the young lion needs to be up deep in the pocket to rough you up, then you yourself shouldn't allow a pocket to be formed. Right? You can stop a lion like that by just not being close to him. Force an up-close and personal guy to fight you at mid or long range. I believe Hopkins tries to win this fight with his legs. I think he has the trainer to do it. I think Joe Smith, talented, very talented. I understand he's keeping his day job while he does this. Joe, you have a lot of talent. You could be a force in boxing. But here again, just like I'm a skeptic of Conor McGregor fighting Floyd Mayweather, I'm a skeptic of Joe Smith fighting one of boxing's legends, right? Jean Pascal is a huge punch, folks. Huge punch. Bernard Hopkins went the distance with Pascal twice. And again, I'm not talking about Bernard Hopkins of 20 years ago. I'm talking about recent Bernard Hopkins. Right? I think Bernard has been down this road before. He's fought heavy punchers before. He understands that defense starts before you even get in the trenches with the guy. I think Bernard is going to be keeping Joe Smith uncomfortable. I haven't seen the Joe Smith fight where he's doling out a lot of punishment from long range, or where guys are throwing punches, he quickly pivots, punch goes by his ear, and then he comes in quickly and fights at a fast pace. Right? If you're a fighter who needs to be on your front foot and who needs to have your hands in a certain position to operate against boxing's elite, you're going to be at risk. They're not going to allow you to be on your front foot. They're not going to allow you to have your hands the way you want to have them. Bernard's entire career has been built on making opponents uncomfortable, taking opponents out of their comfort zone. I don't think the footage we have on Joe Smith, right, a first round knockout of Andres Fonfara, tells us enough to know what happens if Bernard gets on his back foot, circles Joe, keeps a jab in his face, feints Joe Smith, right? Forces Joe Smith to throw that lethal right hand from distance instead of up close. I'm going with Bernard Hopkins in this one. If the odds allow, I'll hedge the play with Joe Smith by KO. Why? Because punchers only have to guess right once. Right? Joe Smith clearly has one punch knockout power. I'll concede that. I like Hopkins to win, hedged with Joe Smith by KO, right? If that bet's not possible because of the odds, then I'll risk it and take Hopkins by decision, hedged with Joe Smith by KO. Let me point out too, Will Rosinski. I'm aware of the fact that Joe Smith went the distance with Will Rosinski. Will Rosinski's 5'10", Hopkins is 6 feet tall, right? Will Rosinski actually sparred with Joe Smith before their bout, right? Those guys had a history. Joe Smith knew more of what to expect from that opponent than he knows about Bernard Hopkins. So I'm expecting Bernard to come out. This is a typical Bernard Hopkins fight. He gives away the first round, figuring out the angles. Then I'm expecting Hopkins to bank several rounds to the point where Joe Smith is going to have to start to get desperate. Understand, that's when a Bernard Hopkins does things like drop a Beibut Shumenov. Right? People need to realize too that Shumenov, after the Hopkins fight, right after the Hopkins fight, went on to win a title, right? Shumenov still has one of boxing's titles, right? So even old man Bernard Hopkins is still fighting at championship level, right? Don't look at his fight against one of boxing's best pound for pound, Kovalev, and reach the conclusion that Hopkins is finished even after Hopkins went the distance in that fight. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.